Welcome back to the Wide Awake Media podcast. I am your host, DD Denslow, and we're here to speak to real journalists, unsung heroes, and freedom fighters who oppose technocratic establishment plans for population control, tyranny, and a new world order. Today, our guest is world-renowned comedian and host of the very, very popular Jimmy Dore show, and his numbers are through the roof, and is probably one of the greatest truth tellers on the internet. Not because he is always right, but because he is honest enough to admit when he is wrong. I credit Jimmy as the person who woke me up by pointing out Silver Fox Donny Deutsch wore two watches, along with all the other deceptive tactics and language used by the mainstream media to cover up the Russia collusion hoax. To my amazement at that time, and it was a jaw-dropping moment when I realized that all mainstream media lie just to help the private profits of private corporations. Jimmy, I have massive respect for you, and I'm honored to have you on the Wide Awake Media podcast. Jimmy Dore, welcome, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I forgot that Donny Deutsch wore two watches. That's so funny. He does. I just think that he was, that's just a guy who really cares about being on time.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah. And he's got so much money, that he needs to spend it on extra watches and gold bracelets and then making sure he gets them on camera at every opportunity. But I mean, it was that episode that I remember watching of yours on your Jimmy Dore show. And you pointed out how everything was geared up towards war. Everything was geared up, the language that they were used in a very sort of, as I said, deceptive way, geared up to selling vaccines or other corporate products to the public or ideologies. And I never saw it. I actually thought the BBC were a paragon of the truth. And I used to argue with people on X back in the day. What do you mean the BBC lies? And actually, they all lie, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, they all lie. And Noam Chomsky taught us that in America anyway, with a book called Manufacturing Consent.
Uh-huh.
And he showed how the media all coalesce around a narrative. And, that was before in the United States, they did a thing in 1996 where they used to have 50 giant media companies. And then they passed called the Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant media companies down to six enormously giant media companies. So now there's just six companies that run every TV show, every radio show, every newspaper, magazine. So they're all run by just six companies. And so that's kind of the opposite of capitalism and free market. That's what Marx said would happen with capitalism. It eats itself. And so now you don't really have any choices. Now you just have a handful of billionaires manufacturing the consent of the populace for their agenda, because that's what the news is there to do. The news is not there to actually inform you or give you news. It's there. If that happens along the way, that's good. But their primary focus is to manufacture consent for the oligarchs' agenda. And that's what they do. So that's why they're always pro-war, because the oligarchs always want pro-war. That's why they're always pro-big pharma, because they're bought by big pharma in the United States. Anyway, we're only two countries in the whole world allow direct marketing of big pharma drugs directly to the consumer. I thought that's what we had a doctor for. So it's completely bastardizes the whole medical process. So yeah, they lie constantly, and it's at the behest of the establishment. And all the journalists, think the same. If they thought differently, they wouldn't have a job in corporate media. If they thought differently, they as Noam Chomsky said, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair. You believe what you believe, which is why they hired you. And I remember one time I was on a panel. I was being hosted by an Emmy Award-winning newsman from NBC, and he said to me, I said, isn't it weird that, about how you all are like-minded? And he said, well, Jimmy, I don't know if you've ever been into an editorial meeting for a big news organization, but we all argue with each other back and forth about things. And I said, no, I'll never be in an editorial meeting for a corporate news show. You know why? Because you've been groomed to be in that meeting since the time you were in kindergarten and you don't know it.
Uh-huh.
I, on the other hand, have always colored outside the lines, so I will never be invited into that editorial meeting. And isn't it funny that you guys have these arguments, but you always come down on the side of the establishment, especially when it comes to war. You're always pro-war. When was the last war that the corporate media opposed? Can't think of one.
No, unless it's Russia. Yeah, if it's Russia's doing it, then they're anti-war, aren't they?
Well, they're pro-Ukraine. They're
Yeah, that
for.
side.
Yeah, so they're for funding that war. They're for Ukraine fighting. They were against a peace deal that they had worked out literally weeks after the invasion of the Donbass. So that's another story.
Yeah, and maybe we'll touch on that a bit later on. So I first come across you in 2006. You had darker hair then, and you was on the Young Turks. Give us a sort of slight biography. I don't, obviously you don't want to your full career in detail, but just a sort of your autobiography of how you've progressed from the early days of YouTube and comedy to where you are now, and what happened to the Young Turks and left and right politics as they sort of separated and moved to the fringes.
Well, what happened to me was the Iraq War. I couldn't believe it. And I was watching, I had a back injury back then, and I was consuming a lot of cable news programs in the United States. And I couldn't get over how they were all lying about the Iraq War. It just was mind blowing to me to see it happen. And I got asked to do a show not a stand up show, but a comedy show that I had to invent at the UCB Theater up in Los Angeles. And so I decided to just do my version of video, stand up, and sketch comedy. And it was I was all about politics. So that's what led me to my 1 hour special on Comedy Central. People from Comedy Central saw me and they liked me. I did a 1 hour special. It was called Citizen Jimmy, and it got chosen Best of the Year by iTunes and Punchline Magazine. So that's how the Young Turks became aware of me, and they asked me to come in and guest host for them. And when I did, they told me nobody's going to like you. They only like Cenk Uygur. Nobody likes their guest host. Well, everybody in the comments loved me, so they immediately offered me a job, and so I started working at the Young Turks. Probably, I think that was maybe 2009
Uh-huh.
or so, maybe 2010. And so I worked with them, and then it was great. I loved it. We were all progressives, and we all were on the same page, and we also saw through the corporate media and through the corporate owned Democratic Party, right? We would always criticize the Democrats harder than the Republicans because the Democrats were supposed to be on our side. But what happened was Trump got elected and the Young Turks just devolved like everybody else. They weren't able to have the character or the strength of mind to resist repeating FBI and CIA conspiracy theories and talking points, and so that's what they did. And that not only did they do it around RussiaGate and Donald Trump, uncritically repeating FBI lies and propaganda, but they also repeated uncritically the CIA and the pro-war propaganda about the Syria war.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, that carried over to Ukraine. So RussiaGate was there to get people ready for the war with Russia, and it worked. And so they were 100% for the war in Russia with the Ukraine war. And so that's what happened to them. They even slandered Julian Assange. That's how bad it got. That they started to slander anti-war journalists, which is they're supposed to be on the side of them. So they were doing the bidding of the establishment. So that happened. Trump happened. It ruined them. But they also took $20 million from one of the top Democratic Party donors, and so that kind of screwed them. And they became corporate media.
Uh-huh.
And so now they have a board, and now they have donors that sit on that board and hedge fund managers, and so they became corporate. And it was like they couldn't get a story right. And what the final straw for them was when uh, there's a thing called forced to vote. It's kind of hard to explain, but the Democrats have always said that we want to have a vote in the House of Representatives for Medicare for all because we don't have health care in the United States. It's just private. You have to buy it privately, and then when you get sick, they don't pay for your health care. And people go bankrupt. It's a horrible system, and so we've always agreed. The Democrats have always agreed that Medicare for all was a priority and to get a vote for it. So when they had a slim majority after the election in 2020, they had a slim majority in the House of Representatives. And so they have to vote to elect the Speaker of the House, which was going to be Nancy Pelosi. Well, it was such a tight, narrow margin. There was only eight more or so Democrats in the House than there were Republicans. And without the eight progressive Democrats like AOC and Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal, those types, those are considered real progressives who are against the corporate Democrats. If they didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, then she couldn't become Speaker because they wouldn't have enough votes. So we decided to tell them to demand that for our vote for you as Speaker, you will allow us to have a vote for Medicare for all on the House floor. It was a goal of the left for generations. They refused to do that. They refused to actually challenge the establishment and the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, like they said they would in their campaigns. All of them said they would. And AOC lamented about the fact that we can't get a vote for Medicare for all now. So this was a way they could get it. And so I started this thing called Force the Vote. Let's force a vote for Medicare for all. And everybody was on board at first. And then the Young Turks got the phone call from some big donor, probably their big $20 million donor, and said, don't do this. And so they flipped. And then they found they had to twist themselves in a pretzel. And they lied about force the vote. They lied about me and they tried to discredit us. And they sided with the politicians over the healthcare activists. And so their own audience saw that. They actually did a poll, which was the dumbest thing they could do. They did a poll of their members on how they felt about force to vote. Did they agree with Jimmy Dore, force to vote, or did they agree with the Young Turks? Well, 9 out of 10 of their own paying members agreed with me and force the vote, and they saw what they were doing. And so their company and their news show completely tanked after that. They lost subscribers, they lost views, and they did it to themselves because it was blatantly obvious to everyone that they had betrayed their own values and their own ethos and their own motto and their own thing about going against the establishment and the corporate Democrats. So to me, that was the final straw. And then, of course, they got COVID wrong. They got the Ukraine war wrong. They slandered people who told the truth about Ukraine and Syria. They slandered people who told the truth about masks and vaccines and Dr. Fauci and the lockdowns. They slandered everybody. They sided with big pharma and the government and big media, and so there was just no point to them anymore. You could get anywhere you go, you could get the news that they were giving you. So the whole point of the Young Turks was they were supposed to be alternative to the corporate news media, and they just became the corporate news media, repeating FBI and CIA talking points, repeating big pharma talking points, repeating Democratic Party talking points to slander activists. They even slandered Julian Assange. So that was the end of them, and so they barely would crack 10,000 views on a video for quite a while. That happened. And so now they finally found a war that they can be against. They're against the Israel's genocide in Gaza. So they've been screaming at the top of their lungs about that ever since. And now they used to slander me because I always said it's not a left-right fight. That's a mirage that the establishment wants us fighting each other, because if we realize that the people in America on the left and the right have more in common than divides us, we can come together and oppose the establishment and the oligarchy. And that's the only thing that really scares them. And my neighbor is not my enemy. My neighbor is hurting under this same oligarchy as I am. And so we have a shared interest, but the establishment wants you to hate your neighbor as your enemy. And that's what the Young Turks preached for years and years, that Republicans, conservatives, and right-wingers were racists and Nazis, and they were your enemy. And they're the person you have to fight against and be wary of. And I always preached against that and said, no, that's a trick that the establishment plays. And so recently, very recently, they've made a turn. And now they're saying the exact same thing they slandered me for. I used to go on Tucker Carlson's show when he was on Fox News. He would invite me on to come bring my anti-war message because Tucker was also against the Syrian war. He was also against the Ukraine war. And he would bring me on his TV show to tell his audience about it. And they would call me a sellout because I was on Tucker Carlson show, which is doesn't make any sense, right? So that as if every show I go on, I share the opinion of the people on that. That's not how it works. So now they've switched, and now they love Tucker Carlson and they love Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Yeah.
and they're preaching unity, and all after they lost the election to Donald Trump. It wasn't until up until Donald Trump's election they were calling everybody Nazis and racists and white supremacists, and then as soon as they lost and Kamala Harris lost, they were like, "Oh well, we got to come together now." So they finally. So again, they're about 5 years behind me, as they always have been, and that's the story of the Young Turks. And so I left. I had to leave when I couldn't take the Russiagate anymore, and them repeating the FBI narrative and uncritically, and they slandered Julian Assange, and that was just I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't be there anymore. In fact, their whole company kind of hated me because I would come in and do my show, which was called Aggressive Progressives, right after they would do their main show, and I would come in and I would debunk everything they just said about Russiagate, and people knew it. And I was their by far their most popular members only show. I was their most popular host, second only to Cenk. And so they were upset that I was turning their own audience against them by telling their audience the truth about Russiagate. And so when I would walk into the newsroom with my crew, they would turn their backs on us. That really was happening.
Really?
And they wouldn't talk to us and they didn't like us. And so I was just like, what am I doing here? I thought we would all get over Russiagate and we'd all come back together as a happy family after the Mueller report, which was the investigation into Russiagate. And when the investigation concluded there was no evidence that Donald Trump was in a conspiracy with Russia, I thought we'd all come back together, and we didn't. They just stopped. They just kept going with Russiagate anyway, just like Rachel Maddow and the establishment news. And that's when I was like, hey, I've got to go. I got to leave. And it was the smartest move I ever made.
The Russiagate narrative, does that still exist in the
Yes.
minds of people, particularly on the left, that President Trump is a Russian asset, that he was cheated into power in 2016, and he was on Putin's payroll? Do people still believe that, even though the Mueller report found it to be a nothing burger?
Yes, people still believe that. In fact, Rachel Maddow, I just had a video of her I saw last week, current video of her saying that very thing, that he's controlled by Putin and he'll do anything. She says, I still don't know what Putin has on him, but he's got blackmail on him and he does the bidding of, but so she's still saying that. So, that's one of the biggest Democrat news shows there is. I don't call her left. She's not left. She's very right wing. She's pro censorship. She's pro war.
Uh,
She's anti bodily autonomy. She's not for my body, my choice.
uh,
And those are, and she's very pro big pharma. And those things are used to be considered hardcore lefty values. That you were critical of big pharma as murderous cartels. You were always anti war, pro peace. You were always free speech, anti
yeah.
censorship, and you were always for bodily autonomy, my body, my choice.
Uh,
Well, they're not that anymore. So they're not left wings anymore.
uh,
So I don't know what you call them. I call them authoritarian. You would say, well, they're right wing now. But most of the right wingers I know are anti war and they're for free speech and
it's
they're
like the
for
roles have
body.
been flipped, haven't they? But they
Yeah.
also you think there's been a deliberate tactic by the establishment, by the media, to drive both sides as far apart from each other as possible, to ensure that there is never that bridge or pass in which people can meet, because it seems like there is no coming together of the left and the right ideologies within the public. Yeah, that divide and conquer.
Yeah, and it's so funny you bring that up because they love to say on corporate news, like I was watching the Erica Kirk interview with Barry Weiss, the Zionist caster Barry Weiss on the Zionist news channel CBS, And she said, the country. She started off her interview with the country's terribly divided. We all know the country's terribly divided. Well, if you keep saying that, so that's what it's in their interest to have the country be terribly divided.
Uh-huh.
So again, as I said, we keep fighting each other instead of coming together to fight the establishment and the Zionist-controlled government and media in the United States. So yeah, I don't think we're that divided, but it's in the interest of the establishment and their media to make people believe we're divided and that your neighbor is your enemy. So we've been living since Trump got elected that half the country is your enemy, half the country are Nazis, half the countries are racist, white supremacists, and I've been vehemently against that.
We have exactly the same agenda here in the UK, across Europe, where this politics and division is played out in our mainstream media. And no better example of this was during COVID. And so I'm just going to go straight in there. You fell for COVID. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm not, oh, you fell for COVID, Jimmy, but you believed what they were telling you about the pandemic at the beginning. I also did, just as I fell for the Russiagate hoax. Why? What was it about COVID that made you believe that you were being told the truth?
Two things. I had never experienced a lie like that before, and it was global. So
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's not just in the it's everywhere. So this got to be real. Also, fear. I have a uncurable and incurable bone disease that almost did kill me back in 2006, and so they can only treat it. And so the narrative was that this is such an insidious virus that even if you're healthy, it'll go find your weakest organ and it'll kill you through your weakest organ. And I thought, oh my God, it's going to go to my bones and kill me. So they had, they had me scared to death. So I took the jab. I got double jabbed with the Moderna. And what woke me up was that I got vaccine injured. And so I got put into a study on how to treat people who were vaccine injured from the COVID vax. And the first thing they gave me was ivermectin. And I said to the doctor, I'm like, hey, this is a horse paste. Why are you getting? And then he explained to me that no, ivermectin is actually a wonder drug that won the Nobel Prize for human medicine, and that it's on the WHO list of essential medicines for human beings. And the reason why they're lying about it and trying to make people trying to discredit ivermectin is because it's a generic drug. Nobody can make money off it. You can't. You can produce it very cheaply. Anybody can produce it. There's no patent on it anymore. It wore off. And the second reason is, and the more important reason, is because if ivermectin did treat COVID, which it turns out it did, they wouldn't be able to get their emergency use authorization for their vaccine. And so they had to say there were no treatments available for COVID, which they knew was a lie. Hydroxychloroquine, steroids, vitamin D, ivermectin, monoclonals. There were lots of treatments for COVID. Then they lied. And so as soon as I got that ivermectin, I was like, well, if they're lying about this, what else are they lying about? And it turns out I started to look into it, and it turns out they were lying about everything. They lied about the origin of the virus. They lied about funding the virus. They lied about masks. They lied about herd immunity. They lied about natural immunity. They lied about lockdowns. They lied about the vaccine stopping transmission. They lied about the vaccine stopping contraction. There wasn't a thing they didn't lie about when it came to COVID, and nobody has to pay a price for that. And still people don't realize that they were lied to on such a grand scale, because I think it was such a big lie that they can't wrap their minds around it. And if people admit that they were lied to as much as they were about COVID, then they don't have to admit to themselves that they also acted like monsters
Uh-huh.
and authoritarian Nazis, wanting people to get fired from their job for not taking an experimental medical treatment that has big side effects. And so they would have to admit that to themselves, and it would make them feel like horrible people. So instead, what most of those people do is they just ignore it and go, "Oh, COVID's over," and so they don't have to face it.
Everyone just moved on, and not one single person has been arrested. I could think of one person in particular, Mr. Fauci, should definitely be arrested for crimes against humanity. You could argue, in fact, the entire establishment committed crimes against humanity. How is your? I'm trying not to delve, but just out of interest, how is your vaccine injury now? Have you recovered? Are you better? Is it going to be a lifelong problem?
Yeah, so it's I still have one of the side effects was nerve damage. I had an occipital neuralgia in my neck, and I would say it's 80% better. I also got a plantar fasciitis, which is also a side effect of the vaccine. People don't know there's a list of the side effects longer than my arm
Yeah.
that you get from that vaccine. So I have that, and then I never know now. Like now I have kidney problem. Is that caused by I don't know, and nobody can tell me. Is my kidney problems caused by the vaccine now? And so whenever and so I was also exhausted all the time, and I had all kinds. So I was getting headaches. I had all kinds of symptoms. So now whenever I get a headache, I'm like, is this just a headache or is this from that? So I don't know, but I would say I'm 80% better.
Okay. Well, that's something, I suppose, and I
Yeah.
hope you fully recover, Jimmy. I take it then you've actually been involved with the vaccine injury or vaccine injured community. Is it widespread? Is it as widespread,
Oh.
say, in my world of the conspiracy world? Is it a large percentage of people who accepted this medical device and brand new technology that have been injured? In your experience?
In my experience,
Yeah.
yes. They come to my shows, and I do stand-up shows. You can see over my shoulder, I'll be in Waikiki on the 11th of January. They come to my shows, and I meet them afterwards. And yeah, I'm overwhelmed by how many people have vaccine injuries, and also tell me that, yeah, my dad died after he got the vaccine, or my mother died after the vaccine, or my daughter died. That was one of the most heartbreaking ones recently. So yeah, the official stat, or I don't know if it's official, but the stat that is reliable was 1 in 800 jabs produced a major serious adverse event.
Yeah.
Now let's keep in mind that when we had a similar thing back in 1976, I think they had a swine flu,
Uh-huh.
and so they had a swine flu vaccine, and 1 in 100,000 people had a serious adverse event, and they pulled that vaccine. So now it's 1 in 800, and they just keep recommending it. They're still recommending it. So what's interesting to me is that, people would tell you don't do your own research and just listen to the man on the TV to tell you what to do, which is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But people said that, even comedians said that. Just listen what the man on the TV says, and which is just the craziest thing. But anyway, now what was the point? What was the point I was going to say? Oh, so they would tell you don't do your own research, listen to the man on the TV. But at some point, 9 out of 10 people in America stopped taking their COVID boosters. So at some point, they stopped believing the TV, they stopped believing the government, and they started to think for themselves. And I just wonder at what point was that? And nobody makes a big deal out of it. Nobody goes, oh, yeah, I stopped believing them at the sixth booster. I stopped believing them at the eighth
Yeah.
booster. I stopped believing them at the 12th booster. When did you stop believing them? And when did you start to give yourself permission to think for yourself?
What happened in this country is Russia invaded Ukraine, and I went down to the local supermarket, the local mall. The day before, everyone was still walking around in masks. This is in 2022. I went down there the next day, everyone's like waving a yellow and blue flag, and
Yep.
that happened overnight. And you mentioned earlier about the authoritarianism, about how your neighbor actually is dangerous. And I find this quite scary because the media literally can flip a switch and make people, a certain element or group of people, behave in a certain way. And I was really, really concerned that the biggest threat that I faced is if the mainstream media were asking the public to do something quite drastic about us vaccine refuseniks or people who didn't want to wear a mask. And we actually saw that on plenty of videos on social media as part of the propaganda campaign of, young girls being slammed on the floor in Australia because they weren't wearing a mask. Do you think that is a major problem in society, that people are so easily manipulated?
Yeah, so I'm blanking on the guy's name who wrote the book about mass psychosis formation around COVID. And so it's a real psychological phenomenon. It doesn't just happen around COVID. But people who are isolated, have free floating anxiety, things of that nature.
Yeah.
It contributes to them being extra vicious when it comes to stuff around COVID. They go along with the mass formation psychosis, and they feel righteous and actually being an authoritarian. They feel righteous in how vicious they are against someone not going along with the establishment narrative, and it makes them feel like good people, and it makes them feel virtuous. But it's the exact opposite, and they became the exact opposite. I've seen so many people who were the biggest, skeptics of government and the establishment completely roll over for COVID and just completely betray themselves. Comedians who betrayed themselves and their audiences. It's just shocking. So yeah, I mean, I'm shocked, but that there's like a real psychological basis for stuff like this happening, and it just makes me realize that I used to think up until COVID, like, wow, how did Hitler get that done? He got all those people in Germany to go. And I realized now it wasn't so hard. It turns out it's not so hard.
Yeah, and it's frightening for the future because you don't know what plays or what tricks or theatre is going to be pushed on the public next. Just the last couple of questions on COVID. In this country, they changed how excess deaths have been reported. Before, it was everywhere. You had the little ticker, had it on CNN, it would be a rolling count of COVID deaths. Now there's massive excess deaths compared to prior to the sort of baseline before 2020. They've actually now changed the reporting methodology for excess deaths in this country. I saw a statistic coming out of America today that said that in the working age group of 20 to 45-year-olds, the excess deaths are up 40%. Is there any way that you can qualify that?
People don't even know what that means, excess deaths. I've kind of stopped trying to explain it. And that it's connected to the vaccine, to the COVID vaccine, which, by the way, is not a vaccine.
No.
A vaccine up until COVID used to be a medical intervention that created immunity to a virus. Now they switch that and they say now it creates an immune response, which is they had to literally change the definition of what a vaccine is so they could call the COVID jab a vaccine. So it's not a vaccine. And what was the question again? No, I forget what the question was.
It was talking about excess deaths, and I saw a statistic today that said in the sort of median working age range, there is excess deaths of 40% in the USA.
Yes.
Above a baseline of some sort. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that you're hearing that qualifies that statement.
I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that the excess deaths is certainly happening, and it's being ignored by the establishment, but it's not being ignored by, certain medical papers and certain medical research that's being done. And certainly people like Dr. John Campbell on YouTube has covered the excess deaths really well. I've also I've reported his reporting, Dr. John Campbell's reports on the excess deaths, and if you look into it, it's happening. But again, most people don't look into it.
And they're not putting the two things together. Oh, we've lost a lot of relatives in the last 2 years,
right?
But they're not connecting the dots. So here's the $1 million question then. What was the purpose of COVID, and in particular the vaccine program? Because they're still pushing the vaccine, even though the FDA has now given it, or the CDC have given it a black box, is it called? Like it's like the most severe warning for adverse effects. Yeah, they've got pregnancy campaigns to get your pregnancy jabs here in the UK, even though that information has come out. Why the push on this vaccine? Is it just a profit motivation?
Yeah, I think I know it came from the military. So this was what they call DARPA, which is an arm of the Pentagon, which is a military industrial complex. And so this came from the military. This was a military operation. They used the CIA to fund the virus creation so I think it's like a bioweapon. So, and I think it served several purposes. So they had event 21 or 2019 or whatever that
201,
event
event
was.
201. Yeah.
Yeah, event 201, that's
Yeah.
it. And so it's like they planned it. So so I think one of the things was they wanted to get everybody digital IDs, get people used to that idea. So it served several agendas.
Uh-huh.
And one was to increase the profits of people like Bill Gates and the big pharma. Second was to get to try out a bioweapon. Third, it was to get people digital ID'd and get people used to tracking themselves and being surveilled. And it was also a good way to divide the country. But some people say it was also to try to cull the population and population control, that it was intentional to kill people. Well, I don't know how it almost couldn't be, because they knew what they were doing. They knew it was killing people. They completely fudged there was really no real trials, and then they went ahead and vaccinated the control group. So we'll never know.
Yeah.
So that was they did these things intentionally. So they were obviously they knew that the vaccine was bad news, and so that's why they purposely corrupted the trials. And the trials, there was whistleblowers in the trials and people who were made sick. They lied about them. It was one, again, it was, and no matter where you looked at the COVID, it was one lie after another. So I think there were several purposes. The big one, I think, was money.
Always follow the money. And they know that they're the damage caused by these vaccines. And yet they still, even now, 5 years on, are pushing these deadly jabs. And so you have to look and go, well, they are deliberately trying to harm people. It seems likely if it's a
Yes.
known outcome. And I'm just going to say, watch for fertility rates. Watch fertility rates in the future, because I believe that that's going to be an even more dramatic effect or impact of these medical devices. Okay, Trump. We'll go. This leads us nicely into Trump, because he was the guy who brought in the vaccine through his Operation Warp Speed here in the UK. I think it was called Operation Moonshine or something like that. He's now back in power. How do you rate his latest presidency? What he's doing, and I'm talking about wars, immigration, and in particular, because we are the Wide Awake Media podcast, and you've already alluded to vaccine passports, his relationship with big tech, particularly people like Palantir and Peter Thiel.
Well, Donald Trump famously promised to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C., and he didn't. He turned himself into the biggest swamp creature that there is. And he's in bed with Big Pharma and Wall Street, the military industrial complex, and the feudal techno overlords, which is what his top advisor, Steve Bannon, referred to them as, the people from Silicon Valley. And people like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and Palantir, and he's expanding the surveillance state. So Donald Trump there isn't one promise he hasn't betrayed that he ran on, and so he ran on. He's going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Well,
Uh,
here we are. It's December, and he's still funding it.
yeah.
Not only did he not end it, he's funding it. He's still putting sanctions on Russia because of it. So that's him completely giving in to the deep state that he swore to oppose. Now he's in bed with the deep state. He's doing their bidding. He bombed Iran at the behest of Israel. He bombed Yemen at the behest of Israel. He's now accepting the head chopper from Syria, an Al Qaeda guy who's running Syria, to the White House at the behest of Syria, because the Al Qaeda, ISIS, the United States, and Israel are all working together, if you didn't know. Well, now it's obvious. And I said during the Syrian war in 2018, when people were calling me an Assad puppet and a traitor, I was telling them, if you get rid of Assad, who's going to be taking over Syria? It's going to be the Al Qaeda or ISIS, and that's exactly what happened. So Trump's in bed now with Al Qaeda. just like Iraq. So Trump's in bed with Al Qaeda and ISIS, and Trump is bombing Iran, Yemen, and now he's bombing Venezuela to overthrow Venezuela at the behest of Israel and the economic hitmen here in the United States. And of course, he's like, so he's doing the exact things that he said he wouldn't. And of course, he's doing these big shows about getting rid of illegal immigrants, but he's not going after the people we wanted him to go after. He's going after like college students who wrote an op-ed critical of Israel. And he's going after the people who've lived in the community for 30 years. Those are not and he's not going after the people who are working on the farms, people are working in hotels, people working in meat packing, people working in construction. He already said he wasn't going to do that because it would upset our economy too much and our businesses. So they're doing these big shows. They did a big immigration swap of a apartment building in Chicago, and they said they were after criminal terrorists from Venezuela called Tren de Agua. And so they arrested like 800 people. They had zero charges. Not one of those people got charged. So it's all these. They brought in military helicopters in the middle of the night. They rappelled down. Everybody's dressed like they're going in to fight a war. They going into a residential apartment building. They're taking people out naked in handcuffs, and nobody got charged. So that's what they're doing. So they're making these big shows of force, but they're not actually. So they have stopped immigration at the border. So tip of the hat for them to do that. And it also turns out it was a big lie. You don't need a wall. Trump's whole thing was build the wall. You don't need a wall to stop illegal immigration at the border because we don't have a wall, and Trump just already stopped it. So he's bailing out people like Argentina. He gave $40 billion to Argentina, which screws our American cattle farmers here. They just closed a meatpacking plant in Nebraska in the United States, getting rid of thousands of people, thousands of jobs. He doesn't care. He's now for the H-1B visa, which means, if you don't know what that means, it means we're going to import workers into the United States to take jobs away from Americans because they work cheaper. And what happens is the American has to train the foreign person, usually from India, how to do their job. So it's not like we're importing talent that we don't have here. He lies, Trump, and says that is what we're doing. We're importing people who have talent that do jobs that we can't. It's a lie. That's not true. And people know it. They see through it. He talks about China as our spying on our country, and then he passes a bill to bring in 600,000 Chinese students into our country, which so all these things are completely the opposite. Oh, by the way, he's creating hate speech laws to protect Jews, which not really Jews, it's just Zionists. Yeah. So he's doing that at the behest. So the whole thing was he was supposed to get rid of censorship and bring in free speech and get rid of DEI, which is and then he invented a whole new category of hate speech, of censorship, and DEI at the behest of Israel. So there isn't by the way, he was supposed to also cut the deficit. He exploded the deficit. He gave $200 billion more to the Pentagon to increase their surveillance state, and he won't even do an audit of the Pentagon. So he turned into a swamp creature. He's the deep state now. He's the thing he claimed to be opposing. He became it, and it's obvious to everybody because his poll numbers are cratering. He had a 56-point swing since he was elected in his poll numbers, which is unprecedented. Yeah. And so people see it, and
he's losing his base.
There's a saying. Well, he lost Tucker Carlson, he lost Thomas Massey, he lost Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are the biggest voices in conservatism in the United States, and all they have left are the people who are paid by the Republican Party or AIPAC or Israel to go against to try. Now they have to try to discredit Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson or Thomas Massey, and it's not working. So they're losing, which is why you see Benjamin Netanyahu becoming even more desperate, doing false flags in Australia, warning of false flags coming in Europe, that Hamas is going to attack Europe. Isn't it funny that they say that Israel's biggest enemies are ISIS and Al-Qaeda, except they never attack ISIS or Al-Qaeda? Yeah. And isn't it funny that immediately after this false flag by Israel and Australia, they immediately turned to wanting to bomb Iran over it? Within the same day, they were like, oh, we got to bomb Iran because of this. So that's everybody's on to this now. We bombed Libya because of Israel. We bombed Iraq twice because of Israel. We bombed Syria, overthrew Syria because of Israel. We bombed Yemen because of the whole thing. It's always about, and now we're going to do Venezuela and now they want us to do Iran. So that's the last one on the list.
Yeah.
Is Iran, and
That's
that's what they.
definitely coming,
So
isn't it? Definitely coming, Iran. And actually, I saw a statement claiming it was just something that passed me on Twitter as I was scanning the waves earlier on today that there's going to be an announcement or a declaration of war against Venezuela,
yes,
so that the US can capture its oil that the Venezuelans are sat on. Is that going to be the next easy target, maybe, for the American military? Would
I
it be a disaster?
I think it will be a disaster. I don't think it will be an easy target. I think it will turn into a Vietnam for the United
Yeah.
States. Vietnam, which was uh, a complete lie, by the way. Vietnam was always a lie, and they lied us into that war. And I think 50,000 American soldiers lost their life in that war. Besides all the civilians, it's a true tragedy. It was a real quagmire. And if Donald Trump decides to do this, it's going to require land invasion, and that's going to turn into Vietnam, and it's going to be a big mistake. And so again, he's betraying what he ran on. He was the non-interventionist
Yeah.
president who wanted to end foreign wars and invest that money back in our own country. That's what made him popular. Was that he spoke out against the Iraq War and said it was a lie, and he said that George Bush was lied us into that war. He was the only Republican or major political person willing to say that, which made him popular. And now he's become George Bush. He's the thing he claimed to oppose, which made him popular. And now he's super unpopular.
And you mentioned Bondi Beach, and I promised myself before I come on, I won't bring up Bondi Beach, yeah, because it's just too controversial. So don't be surprised if this gets cut, Jimmy. But do you think it was a false flag?
How
And
is it? How is it controversial?
well, it's in this country. I'd have to be. We're not the USA. You do have some semblance of free speech in your country still. In this country, a young lad called David Morgan, who made claims like, "Oh, Israel are responsible for the banking, Israel are responsible for this." He got 20 months for anti-Semitic tweets. 20 months in prison. So I do have to be careful, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
However, I'm still interested in your, I'm a free speech guy. I'm interested in your opinion on that particular false flag. And it looks like that's exactly what it was. And should we expect more?
Well, they said it was first. They said it was an ISIS guy. As I already pointed out, ISIS is working with the Mossad and Israel. So when Israel wanted to also overthrow Assad in Syria, and so they were they were supporting ISIS in Syria. So when an ISIS fighter would get wounded, Israel would treat them medically and patch them back up. So they're not enemies. They're working together for common interests. And so if that was really an ISIS guy in Australia, he's working with Israel. That's a logical conclusion. That's not some kind of wingnut theory. And of course, we know that they're famous for that. They're famous for assassinations. I mean,
They boast
meaning
about it.
yeah, meaning the Israelis. They're famous for concocting false flags. That's the history of how Israel was built. I'm not making this up. And and they warned Australia. What's happening is Israel is losing the narrative. The whole
Yeah.
world is waking up to what they're about, what the Greater Israel Project is about, and that they're committing genocide, and that they really didn't have a right to that land in Israel, that it was given to them in the Balfour Declaration by an occupying force called the UK, which it wasn't their right to give them that land because it wasn't their land in the first place. And everybody's waking up to how it got founded from the Nakba, which was the slaughter of 750,000 Palestinians. They were forced to leave their homes literally at gunpoint, and if they didn't, there was mass slaughters of them, massacres. And and it was, by the way, all the groups that founded Israel and all the early prime ministers were considered terrorists, right? They ran terrorist organizations. And right now, Ben Gvir is the defense minister. He is a legit terrorist.
Yeah.
By the Israeli government says he's a terrorist, and he's in the government. So so I definitely think that not only was Australia engineered as a false flag by Israel and the Mossad, but there are more coming because now they're so deaf because they see it. The Zionists and Benjamin Netanyahu see they've lost the rest of the world now, and so they're getting more aggressive. They're now threatening. If you saw his last video, he's threatening governments, Western governments, to crack down on free speech.
Uh-huh.
And if they don't, that he goes, we demand they do,
Yeah.
or else. So what that tells me is they've got blackmail on lots of Western leaders, not just in here in the United States. That's what Jeffrey Epstein was all about. And believe me, there's not just one Jeffrey Epstein. There's more Jeffrey Epsteins. So they have not only the big money behind Zionism, they have the big Jewish donors, which control the politics here in the United States, but they have them around the world, and they also have blackmail on leaders all around the world, and they're threatening that right now. They also have a thing called the Samson option. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah. So
The Samson
major use of nuclear weapons that they don't have. Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Samson option.
But they have a plan in place to use them.
Yeah. And Iran would probably be target number one for that option, I would suspect. We've got similar narratives in this country, and I don't know how much you pay attention to the mainstream media and the politics here in the UK, but with Russia and Ukraine, right across Europe as well, there seems to be a major push on. They're talking about conscription. They're talking about, oh, Russia's going to attack us any moment. And so there is a fear here in the UK that there may be false flags in that particular arena to expand the war in Europe. Finally, on Trump, just the last thing. What's the situation with digital ID, CBDCs, the social credit? Is that agenda moving along now under Trump?
Yeah, they're expanding the surveillance state. They're going to try and implement. They have a thing called Real ID,
Right.
which is the first step towards that. And so they're tricking people into getting what they call a real ID, which is a federal ID, which we never did that before. We would just get if I live in California, I'd get a state driver's license, and that was my ID. Now they have this thing by the Federal Department of Homeland Security, and so it's got to be, so that's how they're getting people into it. And so Trump's all on board with it. Trump's on board with the surveillance state. He's on board with more money for the bomb makers and less money for you. He's cutting health care for people left and right. He's not investing in America. He's investing in the international security apparatus, which is the war machine. He's the exact opposite of everything he claimed to be. And we're an end stage empire here in the United States where people can't get health care. We pay 100% more for our health care than the rest of the Western world. And we have way worse outcomes. We have our life expectancy is going down. It's going down the opposite way. So, and there's nobody to talk about it. Nobody has a plan on how to fix it. Nobody has a plan on how to make healthcare affordable. People literally go bankrupt. They have no plan on how to fix homelessness here in the United States. Half the country can't afford a $500 emergency. 70% of the country lives paycheck to paycheck. And nobody's talking about nobody in power talks about trying to, not Donald Trump, not the Republicans, not the Democrats. Nobody has a plan to address this stuff. And so it just keeps going because the media doesn't, if the media doesn't make it an issue, then it's not an issue. And so the media doesn't, because the media is not there to inform you or raise issues. They're there to manufacture consent for the agenda of the billionaire class that runs everything.
And you're exactly right about stating, the decline of empire. It's the same as what's happening here in the UK. And I can't think of anything more terrifying than the economic collapse of the USA with their military, which is effectively a doomsday weapon, with all that they've got to go back to. And I think that is what we're seeing in motion right now, the economic decline of the West, and ultimately we're going to go to war. We are coming to the end of our conversation now, Jimmy, and it's been a fantastic chat. It's been amazing to talk to you. We've talked about a lot of bad guys. Are there any good guys? Are there any genuine white hats? And how is there a way that we can save ourselves from these various narratives and agendas?
The good guys are your neighbors. The good guys are the people speaking out against the establishment and not falling in prey to a party, right? People who put their country above party. So I would say people like Tucker Carlson. In the United States, people like Tucker Carlson, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people like Thomas Massey. I think those are generally people with integrity. And in the UK, I'm not as familiar with the UK, but I would certainly say people like Neil Oliver,
Yeah.
uh, who speaks out and speaks the
Uh-huh.
truth and paid a heavy price for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are good guys, but the good guy is your neighbor, and you need to make sure that you join with your neighbor instead of hating your neighbor at the behest of the establishment.
The good guys are all around us. We just need to lurk and connect if we can and forget about petty left and right politics, which we've already described as bollocks and a reason to divide us all. Jimmy, I think you've been an absolute fantastic guest. I will put this. I have lots of notches on my bedpost of people that I speak to, and I'll put you above Lainey Dowdman, who was Miss GB98. So that's how high up you are on my list of people that I speak to or spoken to. I noticed that you've got some tour dates. Is there any links?
Yeah, yeah.
How
Just
can
go
people
to
find your show and stuff? Go for
You
it.
just go. I just go to my website, jimmydore.com, and you'll see a link for all the tickets. I'll be in Hawaii in Waikiki on the 11th of January, and I'll be in the Comedy Store in Los Angeles on the 30th of January. And we're adding a lot more dates all the time. I was just in the UK, by the way, in June. We did a tour. We were in London, Birmingham. We were in Glasgow. We were in Belfast. We were in Dublin and Liverpool. So we made the rounds in June, and I look forward to coming back. We were well received, sold out all our shows. It was a fun time. People in the UK also have a thirst for authenticity and free speech. And they also, there's a lot of them realize that your neighbor is not your enemy, and they like to come and also saw through the COVID narrative. And so it's a fun time to be in a room full of people like that. That's why I like that's the most favorite thing about doing my shows is that being in a room full of like-minded people, even if they're considered lefties or righties, we share common interests, and we also see through the corporate BS. So it's fun. So yeah, jimmydore.com.
Go check it out. And this country, it's that close, mate. It's that close to a revolution. It just takes one event, I think, and this country is like a tinderbox. To everybody who's been listening, we've got more fantastic guests lined up. Maybe not as good as Jimmy, but don't tell them that. And please tune in, and whatever you do, stay awake.